The next item of business is debate on motion 20103 in the name of Graham Day on Scottish Government support for veterans and the armed forces community in Scotland. Would those members who wish to speak in this debate please press the request to speak buttons now, and I call on Graham Day to speak to and move the motion. 10 minutes, please, Minister.
Presiding Officer, thank you very much. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to present the third annual update from the Scottish Government on support for veterans and the armed forces community in Scotland. The first update to Parliament was delivered in 2017 by Keith Brown, and we committed then to updating members on an annual basis, highlighting the work happening across the public sector and with partners in the private and third sectors to improve services and support and ensure no disadvantage for veterans, serving personnel and their families. It is, I think, welcomed by those communities that we have this update as part of the parliamentary calendar. This week, we published Scottish Government support for veterans in the Armed Forces Community 2019, highlighting the actions we are taking across ministerial portfolios to improve service delivery and access. That cross-government approach is vitally important as ministers and cabinet secretaries work together to embed support for veterans. In a way, each and every one of my ministerial colleagues are veterans ministers for their own portfolio responsibilities. An excellent example of that is the Cabinet Secretary for Health, whose portfolio has such a locus in supporting those amongst our veterans community left with unwelcome legacies from their service. And, Presiding Officer, in relation to health, I'm pleased to announce today the National Veterans Care Network, which will be developed by NHS National Services Scotland. This responds to a key recommendation by Eric Fraser, the first Veterans Commissioner, and I'm grateful to him for his role in directing us to deliver a network which will without doubt improve the care of our veterans community in Scotland, like those veterans I had the pleasure of meeting at the Erskine home in Bishopton last week. The Veterans Care Network aims to address a number of issues, including better understanding of the care needs of the veterans population, the barriers to achieving the right access to care, and geographical inequalities of services. Key objectives for the network will be the development of a Veterans Mental Health Action Plan, ensuring it complements Scotland's 10-year mental health strategy, and reviewing current funding arrangements for specialist veteran services, ensuring geographical inequalities are taken into account. The delivery of these objectives and others will lead to greater parity in the level of care available for veterans, no matter where they are located in Scotland. The establishment of this network has been born not only out of Eric Fraser's recommendations, but the views of veterans and charities. I would also recognise that this is a cause which has been championed in this place, not least of all by Mike Rumbles. As Veterans Minister, I have over the last 18 months visited various parts of the country, from Orkney to the Borders, from Ayrshire and Arran to Grampian, to hear directly from those who deliver and those who access veterans' health services. There has been an inconsistency in what is available and how it is accessed. The network will launch formally in the spring of 2020, but work is already getting underway on it, and we are clear on where it is intended to take us. Of course, it's not just partnership working within government, but across the public, private and charitable sectors, which is so critical. This year saw the first meeting of the refreshed Armed Forces Personnel and Veterans Health Joint Group, bringing together NHS champions, representatives of the service community, veterans organisations, Scottish Government and other stakeholders. The group is central to delivering a number of the SVC's recommendations and has identified several immediate priorities, including hearing aid provision and reviewing the guidance on wheelchairs. Like the NHS champions, the role played by champions throughout the public sector remains critical. And I'm committed to strengthening our champions network in local authorities. And following a roundtable I held with them during the summer, we're working with them, the Armed Forces, and Veterans Scotland to develop greater understanding of how they can assist serving personnel, veterans and their families, and again offer greater consistency in that service delivery. Our work with local authorities doesn't end with the champions, however. The Scottish Government's Affordable Housing Supply programme supports them to deliver homes for veterans when they identify this as a priority. For example, we've awarded over £350,000 to East Lothian Council to build 6 homes in Cockenzie for disabled veterans, due for completion by the end of March next year. We've been working with the local authorities to fully consider the housing requirements of the armed forces community when developing local housing strategies. In addition, our new social housing allocation guidance gives practical advice to social landlords on giving priority to service leavers and on ensuring that veterans are not at a disadvantage when applying for social housing due to service time spent out with an area. We've also committed to work with and support public sector partners on employability and skills initiatives for veterans and service leavers who are in transition from the armed forces back into civilian life. At Redford Barracks in September, I had the great pleasure of launching the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework Partnership Guide to infantry qualifications and what they mean in Scotland. This was produced with the support of the Scottish Funding Council. The SCQF partnership are expanding this work to credit further military qualifications against the framework, which will help employers and educational organisations better understand the varied skills and experience that armed forces leavers have to offer. It's just as importantly, it will support individual service leavers to translate their skills when seeking employment or education opportunities. I'm continually impressed, Presiding Officer, by the strength of the veterans charitable sector in Scotland, and I want to thank them for the wonderful support they continue to deliver. I've already mentioned Erskine, but I've also visited and met with many other valued organisations over the past year, such as Scottish War Blinded, and I'm pleased that by working with them and other stakeholders, practitioners certifying people as sight impaired are now guided to ask patients if they served, and then thereafter signpost them to the free services and support provided by Scottish War Blinded. The Scottish Veterans Fund, of course, is our primary route for working directly in partnership with veterans organisations and charities. It has now given over £1.4 million to 150 projects across the country, projects benefiting the lives of hundreds of veterans and their families. The Veterans Fund is also a great example of public, private and charitable sectors interlinking. The Scottish Government is committed to continue funding for a further 3 years, and we welcome Standard Life Aberdeen's continued partnership in the fund. They are providing £80,000 for 2021, bringing the total fund for that year to £200,000. Presiding Officer, I talked earlier about mainstreaming support for veterans and their families, and this is demonstrated in the education system designed so services adapt to meet the individual needs of children. This year, there have been a number of developments which will provide support where needed for armed forces children and families. For example, the doubling of early learning and childcare hours by 2020, an additional £15 million to further enhance capacity in education authorities and schools to respond effectively to the individual needs of children and young people, and our commitment to developing counselling services for schools. As well as supporting service children throughout their school years, we're committed to equity of access to further and higher education for veterans and their families. We're working with the Scottish Funding Council to explore the barriers to further and higher education which may exist for children of service families, including through the work of the Service Children's Progression Alliance Scottish Hub, to champion the progression of children and young people from service families into further and higher education. Very briefly.
Jackie Bailey.
Aware of my constituent's case that I've written to him about before. Can he tell me when this work will conclude, when this will make a difference to service children hoping to go to college or university?
Graham Day.
Jackie Bailey has indeed raised an issue, I think, with my colleague Richard Lockhead directly. This is ongoing work. It's going on across the UK with other administrations. One of the barriers at the moment is securing the appropriate data from the MOD. That is a work in progress, therefore, but it is something that we see as a priority. Presiding Officer, since I took up this post, it's become ever more apparent to me how important the partners of service personnel and veterans are in supporting our servicemen and women to do their jobs, and that when they then go through what can be a challenging time themselves on leaving the forces. We should never forget that partners also need support, and I'm determined that the Scottish Government does all that it can in that regard. That's why we amended the criteria for the Workplace Equality Fund to include members of the armed forces community, including partners and spouses of veterans and service personnel. Scotland's bravest manufacturing companies successfully secured support from the fund for 2019-20, and I'm hopeful that other service charities will follow in accessing funding to support families. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government will continue to work in collaboration with our existing partners in the public, private and charitable sectors, whilst trying to forge new partnerships to improve the support we provide for the armed forces community. My ministerial colleagues and I remain committed to providing the best possible levels of support for veterans, service personnel and their families, both now and in the future. Presiding Officer, I move the motion in my name, and I look forward to the contributions of members and responding to those in due course.
Call Maurice Corrie for up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm pleased today to have this opportunity to speak in support of veterans this afternoon, and not only as a shadow spokesperson for Veterans Affairs, but also as a veteran myself. And with regard to the Scottish Government's motion set out before us today, the Scottish Conservatives will be supporting this motion at decision time later on today. The Armed Forces Veterans community in Scotland, numbering 240,000 people, boasts committed and skilled individuals. These men and women do not need our pity or any other outdated narrative. Rather, they need to be championed, promoted and supported in what they have to offer. And since this last year's publication of the strategy for our veterans, the collaboration again across the UK with other governments, we have seen encouraging moves towards a coordinated and effective delivery of veteran support, one which considers their experience and varying levels of need. And I hope that we will see further progress in achieving the outcomes set out in this strategy, such as improved integration, resilience and ambition. The effort made by the Scottish Government and its partners in support of veterans in Scotland is evident, and I commend those strides. For example, I welcome its commitment to financially support the Scotland's Veterans Fund for the next 3 years. This fund has given an impressive £1.4 million across 150 projects since it began, and today I welcome the Minister's announcement of the Veterans Care Network being launched and acknowledge the input by our colleague Mike Rumbles and his efforts on this concept, which I know he's done a lot of work on, so I thank him for that. In terms of social isolation, especially amongst older veterans, it is certainly right that cooperative partnerships are forged between the government and veterans organisations to ensure that there is an open dialogue. Indeed, the contribution of Scotland's many veterans' charities and organisations is integral in the delivery of support. It is not possible to do their work justice today, but examples such as Poppy Scotland, SAFA and the Armed Forces Advice Project, ASAP for short, point to the range of help that these groups provide, and as a whole to those in need. For instance, since 2018, ASAP has given advice to over 12,300 people and occasions, offering financial issues and also on social security. In regard to improvement, I hope the distinct and diverse needs of older veterans will be considered in greater depth, with a robust and practical action plan in place, one which promotes resources and training for frontline staff. And on this issue, I mentioned last year to the Minister about the work that's put forward by and in place by organisations such as Lothian Veterans Centre, Glasgow Helping Heroes, Coming Home Centre and many others who do such power of work to us. And I did talk and ask that if the government could consider, in many cases, some underpinning funding, because these people and these organisations are dealing with some hundreds of cases every year. And this is obviously taking the load off local authorities and therefore reflects in therefore not having to rely on the funds within the local authorities' social care budgets. So it's a thought, and I look forward to hearing his comments on that in his closing speech. We also have seen further encouragement of the NHS Armed Forces and Veterans Champion Network. Having met with many of these champions across Scotland, it is obvious to me just how worthwhile their role is in connecting with veterans in their community. I would encourage a greater number of representative armed forces champions at the fore of public institutions, and I know we're seeing more of this, whether it be British Telecom, whether it be NHS itself, and many other organisations that I'm coming across, and I welcome this. I am sure that we can all agree that these practical steps, whilst very encouraging, must be accompanied by wider and societal shifts in the understanding and attitudes towards veterans, especially surrounding their experience of transition, which of course has been highlighted by our Scottish Veterans Commissioner, Charlie Wallace, already in reports that he's put to us. I hope to see the strategy reflect this in implementation. And first and foremost, in regards to veteran support, we as parliamentarians are responsible for targeting the misconceptions surrounding the experience of veterans after they return to civilian life. Unhelpful stereotypes can enforce limited ideas of what is achievable and can, in some cases, form barriers to veterans' aspirations. And the Scottish Veterans Commissioner, Charlie Wallace, who I mentioned already, has rightly pointed this out in his recent report. It must be recognised that transition is a complex and nuanced experience, different and unique for every veteran. And our approach to it, in keeping with the strategy of our veterans, will bear in mind the wide range of people who transition back into civilian life, both those who have enjoyed a long military career, as well as those whose service was stopped short, whether for medical or personal reasons. Every year, over 600 skilled personnel leave the armed forces. Their talents, coupled with sound experience, should be of considerable appeal to employers, and it is a failure on our part, as well as that of employers, if our communities and businesses do not seize this opportunity to maximise on their potential and versatile capabilities. Already we have seen progress in employer support. This year, 10 employers, all signatories to the Armed Forces Covenant, received the Silver Award for the commitment to employment initiatives for veterans, including Glasgow Caledonian University and NHS Dumfries. And this support extends to the family, which is very important, as it should do. For example, over 3,400 jobs are advertised through Forces Families Jobs, a site which offers training and employment for family members for those currently serving the armed forces. It is especially important that veterans are aware of the value and transferable nature of their skills from the armed forces. For prospective employers, service leavers can demonstrate commitment, discipline, cooperation, teamwork and leadership. And however, a recent survey conducted by YouGov in collaboration with Forces and Mind Trust showed that of those surveyed, 18% of executives with hiring responsibilities would discriminate against veterans due to negative perceptions of their military careers, citing their belief that veterans do not have the relevant skills or experience for the job. Of course, I recognise that this does not present the full picture, only a snapshot. Yet, while serving personnel need to understand and recognise their transferable skills, likewise so do employers. And I hope that from the government consultation on the strategy for our veterans, practical solutions to this mindset can be explored further. For many looking to life after the armed forces career, housing can be one of the standout concerns, and the strategy identifies that this is a key theme to address. Improvements have been made in this area. And for example, the UK government's Help to Buy scheme has lent more than £280 million to over 18,000 applicants who would benefit from financial contributions to buying, moving or extending their homes. And I'm glad to see this scheme will be further extended for another 3 years. And in my own area of West Scotland, I've seen the pilot launch of the Future Accommodation Model, FAM for short, for service personnel in Her Majesty's Naval Base Clyde at Faslane. And with the site to become the Royal Navy's sole integrated submarine operating base from 2020, the area will welcome around 1,700 submariners from Devonport to Clyde.
Can you come to a close, please, Mr Corrie?
So, in conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, as I said before, the composition and needs of veterans are evolving over time, and the commitment that they make. And I'm glad to see the commitment that the Minister has made today to this for funding. In particular, I would like to hope that he would make sure that the funding for our unforgotten forces is extended beyond June next year. This is very important. I know it's under consideration. And also take into point the points I made last year. So I hope through the implementation of his strategy and the government strategy, we will both encapsulate and promote the value of Scotland's veterans community and the aspirations they seek to pursue. Thank you.
Mark Griffin, up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to speak in the debate on Armed Forces veterans. I'd like to acknowledge from the outset the debt of gratitude that Scotland owes to those who have served in defence of freedom, and put on record the continued support that we, on this side of the chamber, give to our Armed Forces personnel and veterans. We're committed to continuing to work on a cross-party basis to ensure that our veterans and their families receive the support that they need and deserve. In particular, we recognise that our service personnel often need help with the transition to civilian life, especially in finding housing and employment, and we recognise that those who leave the service can bear physical and psychological scars for many years after their service ends. The veterans are an asset to both Scotland's workplaces and communities, and we must ensure that we're harnessing their potential and fully supporting them in that transition to civilian life. Those who have sacrificed the most for our country deserve the best services and care possible, and while recent updates highlight progress, there hasn't yet been enough progress on areas of need outlined by the Scottish Veterans Commissioner. In particular, the Commissioner has noted that funding for specialist mental and physical health services for veterans is disjointed and in some cases ad hoc. Positive progress has been made to address veterans' housing needs, but recent figures show that this may be reversing with an increase in homelessness amongst the veteran community. A more ambitious approach to both supporting our veterans and ending homelessness in general is needed to ensure this doesn't become a longer-term trend. We also have a clear plan to support veterans across the UK, including compensating nuclear test veterans, guaranteeing access to specialist mental and physical health services across Scotland, creating a minimum housing allocation for veterans, and investigating and acting on the barriers to veterans accessing services, in particular mental health services. Now, being a member of the armed forces, particularly during times of conflict, is immensely stressful, I think, beyond anything that we can imagine. But that stressful situation creates a level of commitment and an intense bond amongst service personnel that is unique to our armed forces. We could only imagine how isolated someone must feel if they're discharged from the armed forces into society alone with perhaps no family support, having had such a close bond with the comrades they fought with and possibly lost in combat. Going from living in such close quarters with people they considered family, eating, sleeping, working, socialising with the same group, to then being discharged into a community of strangers who tend not to understand military life and the bond between people it creates. Now, the majority of servicemen and women make a successful transition to civilian life. I can't emphasise that strongly enough. The absolute majority make a successful transition. The veterans we have in Scotland are not a problem. They are absolutely an asset to our communities. Veterans have transferable skills that they may not realise they have, which then become assets to companies and communities. But for those reasons that I mentioned earlier, it really isn't hard to see why a minority of veterans struggle to adapt and reintegrate, which can put a massive strain on family life as well as on those without a family. It's vital then that the advice and support services are in place for former service personnel to adjust to living in mainstream society. We must support plans to coordinate and deliver support and advice services from the public, private and voluntary sectors for ex-service personnel, their partners and their children. Presiding Officer, I will close as I opened by acknowledging the debt of gratitude that Scotland owes to those who have served in our armed forces in defence of freedom. We will support the Government's motion at decision time tonight, and as always, we are happy to work on a cross-party basis to support veterans in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark Griffin. I call Mike Rumbles. 4 minutes, please, Mr Rumbles.
4 minutes. Right, okay. Deputy Presiding Officer, as a veteran of 15 years of Army service with several tours of duty both at home and abroad, I am pleased to take part in this annual debate. And the first thing I want to say is that I want to remind everyone, as Mark Griffin said, and it does bear saying again, that a great many adults in Scotland have served in the armed forces of our United Kingdom, and the vast majority of our veterans go on to live normal and productive lives in civilian life. Unfortunately, though, some of our veterans face particular difficulties in the transition from service life to civilian life, and indeed they may have problems during later life too, and I want to concentrate on these individuals. In previous annual debates, I've concentrated my remarks on what I have seen as the lack of effective provision of veteran services in my own North East region, in particular in the Grampian Health Board area. Last year, I said in this debate that people who have risked their lives for this country and given years of service in our armed forces must be safe in the knowledge that they'll return home to well-resourced support services, both mental and physical, and that these services will be available to them regardless of which health board area they live in. As I said last year too, I know the Minister is personally committed to seeing that the military covenant is more than just words. So it should be seen operating throughout our public services. So I welcome the announcement today by the Minister of the Scotland-wide NHS networks for veterans. We don't yet have an equitable service for our veterans right across Scotland. What I mean by that is the fact that veterans in the North East still make me aware that they have difficulties when they present themselves to their GP, for instance, and that they do not have an effective first point of contact service to ensure that every veteran is pointed in the right direction by their health professional. I know that the health service is not within the direct responsibility of the Minister, and again I'm pleased we do seem to be seeing joined-up government here, but there are indeed specific improvements for our veterans that can be made, and I'm sure the Minister will be receptive to what I'm going to say, I hope. A suggestion has been made to me by some veterans in the North East that some of them would very much like visitor contact from veterans organisations when, for instance, they're in hospital within NHS Grampian. The suggestion is that a veteran's question could be included on admission forms asking if the individual would welcome a visit from a veterans organisation while they're in hospital. So some veterans receive no visitors at all, and I know that some would indeed appreciate the contact. Is it really such a small change? It's really such a small change, but it can remarkably improve veterans' lives. I can't continue my contribution without highlighting the work of both Age Scotland, who aim to boost the health and well-being of those veterans over 65, and the Citizens Advice Armed Services Project. In my area of the North East, Age Scotland stepped in for the over 65s when the Veterans First Point programme lost its funding from NHS Grampian. But this, of course, meant that those under 65 had lost this service. However, I'm told just today that some of the Age Scotland's funding for this may be under threat as of June next year, and it would indeed be a pity if their service couldn't continue. Turning to the Armed Services Advice Project from Citizens Advice, as we've heard already, this is another really valuable service, giving veterans and families advice from 12,000 times right across Scotland, and much of this advice would be to those in the North East. Deputy Presiding Officer, I'm aware from personal contact with veterans in the North East that there is a danger that many don't get the help and support they need, especially in their contact with the NHS. That's why, as I said, I particularly welcome the Minister's announcement today. A lot of good work is being done, and there is indeed a lot more to do. I've made one specific proposal about hospital visiting arrangements, and if the Minister could respond to this perhaps in his summing up, it would be, I am sure, immensely helpful.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I have to be really strict with members. The open debate 4-minute speeches, there's not a whisker of time in hand. I call Gordon MacDonald to be followed by Tom Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I remind members that I have 3 army barracks located at Dreghorn and Redford, plus an army exercise area in my constituency of Edinburgh Pentlands. Scotland has a long and proud military tradition with more than 240,000 veterans in our ex-service community. The SNP government was the first administration in the UK to have a veterans minister and appointed the first ever Veterans Commissioner. The SNP government also established a veterans portal on mygov.scot, which was launched back in 2017 to bring together a range of useful information on housing, health, jobs, education and veterans support services. The Scottish Veterans Fund, established in 2008, has allocated over 1.4 million of funding to more than 150 projects. The fund, supported by the Scottish Government and Standard Life Aberdeen, backs projects that provide new or innovative approaches to improving the lives of veterans. This year also sees the fund open to supporting veterans that help the families, supporting schemes that help the families of veterans, not just those who have previously served. There are also 300 registered charities in Scotland who directly help both those serving personnel and veterans when they leave the armed forces. Organisations across Edinburgh have shown their commitment to our ex-armed forces personnel by signing up to the Armed Forces Covenant. NHS Lothian and my ex-employer Lothian Buses were presented with a silver award from the Armed Forces Covenant Employer Recognition Scheme. Edinburgh City Council and Edinburgh Napier University were recognised with a gold award, as they had, along with other award winners, committed to ensuring that those who have served in the armed forces and their families are treated fairly and are not disadvantaged in accessing services. All of those organisations, the Scottish Government and many other employers across Scotland recognise that those leaving the armed forces are an asset, bringing many transferable skills and attributes to civilian employers. However, they can only take up employment opportunities if they have access to accommodation once they leave the army. I've highlighted the issue before that once a soldier leaves the service, he is given 90 days to find alternative accommodation for his family. Yet, according to the Westminster Public Accounts Committee report published in June of this year, the number of empty properties held by the department was over 10,000 in 2018, roughly the same as 21 years before. It's my understanding that here in Edinburgh, more than 150 MOD homes are lying unoccupied. A previous Public Accounts Committee report on the subject of military homes described the Ministry of Defence failure to reduce the number of empty home properties at a time of a UK national housing shortage as scandalous. That is why SNP MPs will commit to pressing the Ministry of Defence to use vacant MOD homes to house homeless ex-servicemen. But there's another issue that needs examination, and if all veterans who choose to stay here are to benefit from the support Scotland offers to veterans. The Army Families Federation highlight that they and their spouses must meet the knowledge of language and life requirement by taking the Life in the UK test and passing English language test. The foreign-born soldiers also have to pay the application fees of £1,206 per adult and £1,012 per child. So a soldier is served for more than 4 years for the British Army and wants to remain and work in the UK has to fine for the average family of £4,436 in fees, plus £50 per person for the Life in the UK test. The Home Office makes a profit on each application. Is that the way we should treat our veterans?
Thank you very much. I call Tom Mason to be followed by George Adam. Mr Mason, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to speak in this debate once again as we work towards delivering for our veterans individuals that have served our country with distinction deserve only the highest praise. I welcome the update from the Minister regarding the Scottish Government's strategy for our veterans and look forward to seeing further work done to implement this in the months and years ahead. I also commend the Scottish Veterans Commissioner, Charlie Wallace, for his excellent work in producing the positive transition paper that was released last month. It is a thorough and thoughtful analysis of the situation facing many that leave our armed services and the challenges they encounter moving from uniformed services to civilian life. As Mr Wallace has indicated, ensuring that our public services can meet the unique needs of veterans is the key to making sure that as many as possible either return home or choose to make their home here at the end of their time in the military. The Positive Transition Report sets out some areas which are vitally important for easing the process into civilian life, such as the involvement of families, as well as working towards parity of perception and alignment of military and civilian experiences and qualifications. In addition, the report makes it clear that a holistic approach involving governments, local government, local authorities, health boards and the wider community is by far the best way to deal with the many of the social challenges that veterans face. This should be considered at the early stages of the military careers, making sure that transition from the military to the civilian life does not place undue stress on individuals in a short space of time at the end. It cannot be overstated that getting the transition phase right is of paramount importance for all those who are leaving the armed forces. If we are able to get this right, then military personnel will be able to leave the forces and move on with their lives in a stable, secure way, with a good job and a home to call their own. If we fail here, it opens the door to individuals getting lost in the system or slipping through the cracks and into either poverty or crime. And I know everybody in this chamber is committed to doing all we can to ensure that this is not the case. I am pleased too that the last year has seen a step change in supporting of veterans across the UK. As the Chamber will be aware, the UK Government set up a new Veterans Office to be chaired by the retired Colonel David Richmond, formerly of the 5th Battalion, the Royal Regiment of Scotland. This represents the first time that the UK Government has put such a strong focus on the well-being of our veteran community. And without wishing to be too political in this debate, I hope that the work is allowed to continue in the months and years ahead. Presiding Officer, I opened my paper yesterday to see the news that Tariff War Memorial Arch in the North East needs an extra £5,000 to finish restoration work. I hope they get it. And this is not me thinking we owe a debt to those who have fought and died to remember their sacrifice and their legacy. I'm delighted to continue to do so. But you also owe just as much to those currently serving when they want to move on with their lives and enjoy the freedoms they have fought for. So we must keep working to ensure that our veterans have the support they need as they leave our nation's service. And I look forward to seeing this work go on in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr Mason. I call George Adam to be followed by Jackie Bailey. Mr Adam, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, Presiding Officer, in here, but I'm from Paisley. And coming from Paisley, there is a long association with the Argyll and Southern Highlanders. Many veterans in our town served all over the world with the Argylls. And the connection with what was the Argyll and Southern Highlanders Regiment and the town was such that they even got given the freedom of the town as well. And many of them meet in the Legion in Paisley. And Paisley's Legion has no number. It's purely the Comrades Club. The club was created in the return of many veterans from the First World War, and it was set up to support veterans to ensure their successful reintegration to civilian life. Time moves on, Presiding Officer, but the challenges still remain the same. They saw themselves then, and as they do now, as comrades. The club today supports its member and does an unbelievable amount of charity fundraising, recently helping Stacey raise funds for MS research in the Anne Rowling Clinic. But many veterans return to civilian life and they have difficulties reintegrating. This can be because of some of the experiences that they've had while serving abroad, or in some cases it can be something as simple as having left family life straight into the army and never having to have dealt with their own finances in the past. I have a constituent who had absolutely no idea about how to deal with paying bills and everything else when he came out of the army, because he'd literally gone in as a teenager. But I was interested in what Maurice Corey said about the transition of veterans, because when I used to, I nearly said the individual's name, but when I used to talk about this individual in Parliament, I used to talk about the negatives, about how the difficulties that he'd had in integrating and becoming financially solvent himself. But now he's self-employed, and he's actually gone through that transition, and he's used the skills that he gained in the army as something as a positive for himself, as he's now got his own chauffeur drive business, and people are quite happy to have a military cross former soldier being there to actually help them get them from one place to the other. But a few weeks ago, I also led a members' debate on nuclear test veterans, and this was in 1956. The UK government decided to drop a nuclear bomb on national servicemen and regular soldiers on Christmas Island. And what these men have been through has been absolutely outrageous. What both they and their families have gone through has been heartbreaking. During that members' debate, I mentioned Ken McGinley from Johnson, who has campaigned tirelessly for these veterans. Ken is an inspiration to us all and is an example of someone who was there in 1956 as a sapper where they dropped the nuclear bomb on top of all these servicemen to see how they would work in a nuclear battlefield. In the modern world, this seems bizarre and crazy, but that was one of the things that but still the UK government has not recognised these soldiers and their plight, these ex-servicemen and their plight, and it's about time that they actually did it. Presiding Officer, I mentioned earlier Paisley's connection with the armed forces, and that might be part of the reason that Scottish War Blinded opened a state-of-the-art centre in Paisley. The Hawkhead Centre is for veterans with sight loss, irrespective of the cause, and it's the activity hub for men and women of all ages and abilities. The Minister and myself visited during the summer, and let's not talk about the archery, just to say that I wasn't very good at it. But no doubt the Minister will wax lyrical about what he did during that as well. But that was an example of some of the things that were offered to everybody in the west of Scotland through this. Presiding Officer, our veterans are an asset to all our communities, and I hope I've shown that in this speech here. There are many, in many cases, they are active members of our community, and we must continue to support them.
Thank you. I call Jackie Bailey to be followed by Tom Arthur. Ms Bailey, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the Deputy Convener of the Cross-Party Group on Armed Forces and Veterans, I welcome the opportunity to participate in this annual debate and to recognise the importance of the contribution of the Armed Forces, veterans and their families to our nation. Let me also welcome Charlie Wallace, Veterans Commissioner, to the Chamber. I attended the service to mark the 50th anniversary of the continuous at-sea deterrent at the Scottish National War Memorial just last week. And I heard the stories of the submariners and their families about just how challenging life is when you're away at sea. Not able to see loved ones, not able to communicate with them, all while stuck in very cramped quarters at the bottom of the sea. So we are all grateful for their service to our country and the work that they do to keep us safe. Members will be aware that Her Majesty's Naval Base Clyde is expanding. In addition to the 6,500 people employed at the Faslane and Coolport base, there are a further 4,500 in the supply chain and in the local economy as a result of the money spent in the area. It is in fact the biggest single site employer in the whole of Scotland, and it is set to become even bigger. Another almost 2,000 service personnel and their families are relocating to Faslane as a result of former Prime Minister Gordon Brown's decision to base all UK submarines at Her Majesty's Naval Base Clyde. Now, although it has been a complex task, the MOD has worked very effectively with neighbouring local authorities in Argyll and Bute and Western Bartonshire to prepare for this. The need for more housing is self-evident, as is the need to make provision in our local schools. And military spouses are bringing with them many talents, setting up their own businesses and contributing their skills to the local economy as well. But it is education I want to turn to and raise issues that I have raised before. The Minister will know that I am persistent, and let me tell him I have no intention of giving up. Firstly, I want to discuss the service pupil premium provided by the Department of Education in England for pastoral care. The service pupil premium is not available in Scotland. It's not part of the criteria for pupil equity funding. Now, this is disappointing, given the concentration of forces families, in particular local authority areas. Secondly, let me turn to the Education Support Fund. This started life as a UK-wide fund with a £3 million budget. It doubled in size to £6 million in 2014, but for the last 2 years, the budget has been declining to £3 million and then £2 million. And of course, it is welcome that it has been continued, but so disappointing that numbers are going the wrong way. Now, Scotland punches well above its weight in the allocation of money from the Education Support Fund. I know it has helped to deliver a range of support activities in local authorities in the Minister's own area, as well as mine in Argyll and Bute. And I think Western Bartonshire weren't successful this time round, but will apply. But it's helped support activities in local authorities where there are large clusters of service children in the schools. And it provides help during stressful periods of relocation or deployment separation. It is invaluable. But education is devolved. I have suggested to the Minister that he should create a Scottish service pupil premium. It doesn't cost that much money, and it would deliver sustainable long-term support, allowing schools to plan better. The Minister and the Scottish Government proclaim their support for service personnel and their families, and I believe they are genuine. Here is a very good way of demonstrating their support by responding to the needs of service children. Let me urge the Minister, let's not wait anymore. Let's not have me make the same speech next year. Let's do it now.
Thank you very much. I call Tom Arthur to be followed by Annabel Ewing. Mr. Arthur, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful for the opportunity to participate in this debate, and I welcome the Government bringing this now annual debate forward, which is an opportunity to reflect on the progress made and the work still to be undertaken. Before moving to the substance of this afternoon's statement and the contributions so far, I just want to put on record my thanks to all those in my constituency of Renfrewshire South who were involved and engaged in our Remembrance Sunday services last month. These are an opportunity for communities to come together, and I want to also express my gratitude to members who have signed my motion for a members' debate that will take next year, where we can all recognise more fully the contribution that those in our communities who preserve and look after our war memorials, who ensure that any new information that comes to light is reflected on the war memorials it takes place, and I look forward to that debate taking place next year. I'd like to begin just reflecting generally on our veterans community in Scotland. Some members may have seen last month on the BBC a documentary led by Gary Lineker, My Granddad's War, which was reflecting on his grandfather's experience serving in Italy. And it touched a chord with me because he interviewed one of the few remaining veterans, a gentleman who's 104 years old, about his experiences of serving in Italy. And it struck me that my grandfather, my mum's father, who I unfortunately never met as he predeceased my birth, would have been 105 years old. And he had served in Italy. He had served with the Royal Artillery, not only in Italy, but also in Greece, in North Africa, and in Sicily too. And the connection between these events and of some 70 years ago and today seem incredibly immediate. And what it made me reflect upon is the nature in which the contribution that veterans make transcends any one particular time period. It resonates to us today. What veterans do in keeping us safe and secure is not just for this generation, but for all generations and future generations. And what particularly struck me is that I'm of a generation where many people of my age went out and fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. And irrespective of what people's particular views were of those wars, we are all united in our support for that community. And so there are many people who are my age who are, having been through that experience, have coming back and making an immense contribution to society. And I know in my own constituency of Renfrewshire South, but I know there are also those who require that extra support. And I think the words of Maurice Corrie were very powerful, is that veterans don't need to be pitied, but they do need to be supported and they need to be championed. And I am delighted to see the sense of common purpose that has emerged across the chamber within this debate and how agreed we are. And one particular area I want to commend the government on in its work is that around employability. I think with regards to the exercises that are underway just now in mapping qualifications to enhance the opportunities for veterans in gaining employment and to enhance veterans' abilities to articulate the relevance of their qualifications to employers is exceptionally important. And I think that is to be commended, as is the amendment to the criteria of the Workplace Equity Fund. I also just want to briefly, before concluding, join my colleagues George Adam in commending the work of Scottish War Blinded, particularly at the Hawkhead Centre, which I was delighted to visit last year. And I would just want to reiterate that point, that the services they provide, they are open to all veterans, regardless of the circumstances in which your sight was lost. But you're telling me to conclude, Presiding Officer, so I shall take your advice.
I was trying to give you a visual warning without something going on the record, but it's a waste of time. Annabel Ewing, followed by Bill Bowman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm also pleased to have been called to speak in this important debate this afternoon, and it is clear from the contributions across the chamber that, in fact, the Scottish Government is to be commended for the steady progress it is making year on year to improve the lives of service personnel and their families, and that in my constituency of Cowdenbeath, across the Kingdom of Fife, and indeed across Scotland as a whole. And I would like to take this opportunity, if I may, to mention Councillor Rod Kavanagh, who is Fife's Armed Forces and Veterans Community Champion. Councillor Kavanagh is himself a former Royal Marine, and he does an excellent job working with charities and with other bodies to tackle the problems faced by individuals across Fife in accessing the support that they may need. In fact, I have recently worked with Councillor Kavanagh on a particular constituency case, and I can say that he is a true champion of veterans and simply never gives up. In the limited time available to me this afternoon, I would like to highlight a few issues of particular importance. First, I am very pleased indeed to note the Scottish Government's ongoing commitment to the Veterans Fund, established by the Scottish Government in 2008. This fund has helped to support a wide range of projects, including on the vital issue that we all recognise of housing and housing support, on befriending and on employability and transitioning to civilian life. And I very much welcome the Minister's announcement today, the Minister's commitment, I'll get on to the announcement later, of another important initiative, but the Minister's commitment to further funding over the next 3 years. And secondly, on the important issue of employability, I'm also very pleased to note the Scottish Government will continue to make funding available to promote transferable skills, an issue that has been highlighted by many members, and quite rightly so. This funding, to be distributed by the Scottish Funding Council, will facilitate the continuation of the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework Partnership. This project provides for the mapping of military qualifications as against those recognised by employers. This is a crucial area of activity, as it is self-evident that those who have been in the armed forces possess a plethora of skills which would be of considerable benefit to a whole range of employers. Third, in the area of health, it is to be noted that there have been a number of excellent initiatives undertaken and facilitated by the Scottish Government. In particular, I would wish to welcome the fact that every NHS board, just as is the case with local authorities, has a champion for the armed forces personnel and for veterans. This is an extremely important post, and the incumbent has the responsibility of ensuring that no armed forces personnel or veterans face any disadvantage in accessing treatment for health issues resulting from their service to their country. And I would also wish to welcome the restructuring of the Armed Forces and Veterans Health Joint Group, which was effected in December last year. So we now have an oversight group chaired by the Chief Medical Officer herself, and an implementation group chaired by the National Clinical Director. And so therefore we can see that great importance is placed right at the very top, Presiding Officer, of ensuring that strategic approaches to policy are taken at that very high level. And this approach has helped to ensure that indeed the Scottish Government is on track to implement the 18 or so recommendations of the Veterans Commissioner in his 2018 report. And I understand that a majority of those recommendations have been or are on the way to being implemented. Partnership working, of course, is crucial, and I would wish to pay tribute to the various charities who work alongside veterans in the Scottish Government, including SAFA, Poppy Scotland, Scottish War Blinded, Help for Heroes, Citizens Advice Scotland and Age Scotland, and many more. And I would like to thank all the volunteers in these organisations for their unstinting support. So, Presiding Officer, in conclusion, we as a society owe our armed forces personnel and veterans an enormous debt, and working together we can ensure that there is the right support and care for those who need it. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I call Bill Bowman to be followed by Keith Brown. Mr Brown is the last speaker in the open debate. Mr Bowman.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I welcome the chance to speak in this debate. With RM Condor and Angus and facilities like Rosendale Veterans Residence in Dundee, it is an issue that involves many of my constituents in the North East region. I'm a member of the Veterans Cross-Party Group, and although not a veteran myself, like many, I have or had parents who were. My father served in the Chindits in Burma. He came home with lifelong bouts of malaria and perhaps other issues, but to his generation, these were not spoken about. I have visited the Rosendale Veterans Accommodation in Broughty Ferry and have seen at first hand the good work that is done by the charity Scottish Veterans Residences in looking after those veterans in need. I've also met with Stand Easy Productions, which is an organisation that encourages veterans with mental health issues, particularly related to PTSD, to learn drama skills to improve their self-confidence, with many using the stage to open up about their time in the forces. The UK Government has set up a new office for veterans, which will be responsible for ensuring that every veteran and their family knows where to turn to access support when required. In addition, in 2014, the UK Government introduces the Forces Help to Buy scheme and will extend it for another 3 years. As mentioned, this scheme has lent over £280 million to over 18,000 applicants. The Scottish Government has also undertaken work in supporting veterans. They are independently advised on Veterans Affairs by the Veterans Commissioner, who we know is here today, who serves as an ambassador for all veterans in Scotland. The primary role of the Commissioner is to improve outcomes for veterans in Scotland by engaging with, listening to and acting on the experience of veterans individually and collectively, and to be an ambassador for veterans in Scotland, helping public services focus on veterans' experiences of their service provision. The Scottish Government has also supported the Veterans Fund since 2008. Since its inception, the fund has given £1.4 million across 150 projects. In 2019, Poppy Scotland welcomed the publication of the UK Veterans Strategy and the work that the Scottish Government did to inform its development. Whilst recognising that veterans' needs are often coincident with other groups and individuals, Poppy Scotland believes that they should be accorded recognition, respect, care and support. The majority of serving personnel make successful transition back into civilian life, going on to make positive and lasting contributions to society. However, a minority require extra support due to a range of needs which can be multiple and complex in many cases. While the action taken by the Scottish Government to oversee and fund activity is making a positive difference for veterans and their families, there is more work to be done. The strategy aims to outline the vision for the next decade, but it is worth highlighting that whilst much can be done to support those going through transition from the armed forces today and over the next 10 years, the support requirements of those who are already veterans today should also be considered. Furthermore, to successfully deliver this strategy, governments at local, devolved and national levels need to work together. Within the Armed Services Advice Project, delivered by Citizens Advice Scotland, the service background of people seen varies between regions depending on the proximity of bases where veterans settle. The variety of people and the variety of help they require is a prime example of how there is more to be done. Collaboration between governments underpins the strategy for our veterans, and I welcome the support from governments across the UK for them. Veterans have unique needs, and more work is needed to raise awareness of and improve responses to veterans' issues. As a result of this, I support the ambitions of the UK and Scottish governments to make the UK, and as part of that, Scotland, great places to be a veteran. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Bone. I call Keith Brown. Mr Brown, please.
Thank you, President Officer. Last week in the debate on mental health, I raised the issues facing soldiers and veterans. I was somewhat surprised to be challenged by Willie Rennie for doing so, but what I sought to do was highlight in particular the loneliness and isolation that many face when they leave the armed forces and some of the mental health issues which ensue. I mentioned also that both the First and Second World Wars were very all-encompassing by nature, and for those soldiers returning home, there was a sense of shared experience for them, a mainstream understanding of what they'd undergone. And yet, within the nature of our armed forces now and the conflicts that they fight, they have changed multiple times since. We know that the experience of armed forces members are now not so widely shared. And for those wishing to leave the armed forces today, there is little mainstream understanding of what it's like to serve. No national shared experience that can welcome them home. Any veteran making the transition from military service to civilian life will face some degree of difficulty and isolation. But as our understanding of mental health improves, we begin to understand just how challenging that transition can be. For armed forces veterans who will be totally immersed in the armed forces culture, who will have been separated from loved ones for long periods, and who may have psychological or physical injuries, those factors are multiplied. We may begin to understand why that for 65% of armed forces veterans, exiting the armed forces causes them to feel lonely or socially isolated. We also have to be proud, I believe, of the Scottish Government's commitment to strengthening the bonds between our society and the armed forces community, and that we also welcome former service members here in Scotland as valued members of the civilian community. That's why I welcome the Government strategy for our veterans, which is a collaborative approach that acknowledges the challenges facing the armed services community and sets out a clear vision to support them across a range of themes, including community and relationships and health and well-being. We know, as we've heard, that returning service members have a wealth of talents and experience which are easily transferable to our economy and to our communities. And as a society, we benefit when veterans are able to make their transition back to civilian life successfully. So I'm pleased to see both the efforts of the Scottish and UK governments to tackle the serious issues surrounding social isolation for our armed forces community. But we have to acknowledge the fact that the issues facing our veterans often arise from their time in service. And this is where I believe many problems occur. In relation to pay for the armed forces, they are 2% below the increase in average wage earnings. They've been subject to a public sector pay cap. Recruitment and retention is in crisis. I think it's up to 8.4% less than the established number of people that should be being recruited. The disastrous handling of the contract to Capita, which has caused these problems as well. And we also have, of course, huge downsizing at the same time as the roles, the asks, the demands of the armed forces have increased dramatically. We also have the situation, and here I fundamentally disagree with Jackie Baillie, where we intend to expend up to £200 billion on nuclear weapons that should never be used. £200 billion, when we can't pay the average wage earnings of society for our armed forces personnel. That is a scandal and it's obscene. And at the same time, we know there are major shortages in equipment. We've known that for some time, whether it was helicopters, whether it was boots. And you're seeing also the training opportunities available to members of the armed forces reducing year by year, which is part of the cause of the retention and recruitment crisis that we have. So if we want to make sure that our veterans have the best possible start when they rejoin civilian society, we have to make sure that their experience in the armed forces is a good one. And the point made by Gordon MacDonald in terms of some of the quality of service accommodation, it is absolutely appalling. And if you have to take your family down being posted, one family I know, 3 different education systems, 3 different countries within 3 years, substandard accommodation, that's a major effect on veterans. So if we're serious about wanting to look after our veterans, and the debate is about armed forces and veterans, we have to make sure their experience in the armed forces is just as good as we expect it to be when they come out of the armed forces.
Thank you very much. Closing speeches, I call Alec Rowley to close for Labour. 5 minutes. Mr Rowley.
Presiding Officer, given we are having this debate so close to Christmas, I want firstly to speak of all those who have served in our armed forces in recent conflicts and paid the ultimate price. For this Christmas, there will be parents, the spouses and the children of those who lost their lives that are broken-hearted and without their loved ones. I know from speaking with members of such families that their grief and their pain is every bit as real today as it was when they received the tragic news of the death of their loved one. So we remember the 19 servicemen from across Scotland who lost their lives in Iraq and the 33 Scots who lost their lives in Afghanistan, and we think of their families at this Christmas. Presiding Officer, I recently met with a charity working with homeless veterans, and they told me that the numbers of veterans that are homeless has not decreased, but is on the increase. Now, I've found it difficult to find statistics on this, like many other areas of social policy, when it comes to veterans. And whilst I recognise the Scottish Government has committed to enhancing the collection, use and analysis of data across the public, private and charitable sectors to build an evidence base to effectively identify and address the needs of veterans, this, in my view, is not happening quickly enough, and perhaps the Minister can say what progress he believes is being made. I note that the British Legion have stated that veterans that are homeless have been found on average to be older, to have slept rough for longer, be less likely to use drugs and more likely to have alcohol-related problems. Indeed, a study by the Ex-Service Action Group highlighted that a clear majority of veterans experiencing homelessness served in the Army rather than the Navy or Air Force, and pointed out that this may be attributable to the tendency of the Army to recruit from educationally and socially disadvantaged backgrounds. So whilst I welcome the work the Scottish Government has done, we must increase the progress as many veterans are still slipping through without the support that they need. I also believe that whilst veterans are specifically mentioned briefly in both the Government's mental health strategy and suicide action prevention plan, this is not enough. One of the key recommendations of the Veterans' Health and Wellbeing Report was that the Government should produce a mental health action plan specifically focused on meeting the mental health needs of the veteran community. The report suggested this action plan should address potential barriers to veterans accessing mental health services, the nature and scale of drug, especially painkiller, misuse by veterans, geographical inequalities in the provision of services, the protection of specialist PTSD services, and suicide risk in the veteran community. The Government did say in April that an action plan would be produced on veterans' health, but I'm not aware that this has happened. So whilst progress is being made, Presiding Officer, there is still much more to be done. We have heard from many in here today that the majority of veterans do transition without any major difficulty, but there is still a large minority that do not and that need more support and more help. Finally, I will finish, Presiding Officer, where I started, by paying tribute to all those who've lost their lives in recent conflicts. It is very important that we never forget the sacrifice that they have made, but we also don't forget the sacrifice and the pain that their families continue to suffer. And it's important that we recognise that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Rowley. And I call on Edward Mountain to close the Conservatives. 6 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And first of all, I'd like to remind members that I was a soldier and I served my country for 12 years. I'm also very proud to be able to say that my son is still a soldier, serving in the same regiment that I did. Now, I don't foresee a future when we won't need our armed services to protect our nation and to be a force for good across the world. And there are those that do. And my message to them is simple: I believe you are very, very wrong. The veterans, therefore, will also always be part of our responsibilities, as will their families whose loved ones remain on duty. And as a veteran, I'm pleased there continues to be cross-party support in this chamber to improve the support and services aimed at veterans and armed forces community. I hope this may well continue for the future. And at this stage, I'd like to pay credit to the Minister for all that he is doing on behalf of the veterans. I know I often give him a hard time, but I do believe he works tirelessly on their behalf. I also welcome the combined approach taken by the UK, Scottish and Welsh governments, which has seen all three jointly create the strategy for our veterans. Through this strategy, veterans can expect by 2028 to feel more valued, supported and empowered, and not disadvantaged as a result of their service. This is why I support actions of groups such as the Unforgotten Forces Consortium, coordinated by Poppy Scotland. But let us not forget that that is 8 more long years to fulfil that ambition. The clock is ticking, and veterans rightly expect all three governments to deliver, and I believe this Parliament will make sure that the Scottish Government do. Now, I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome the Scottish Veterans Commissioner's most recent report, Positive Futures, Getting the Transition Right in Scotland. It is clear from this report that governments and charities have a responsibility to help veterans transition from military life to civilian life and make it as smooth as possible. More can be done to help veterans find a new career and new accommodation, which has been mentioned already, and these are just a few of the areas. And transition from services is challenging time, especially for some veterans. And let me be clear, we should understand that building a new life as a civilian cannot happen if veterans are being wrongly pursued. Now, this chamber will have come to expect from me to mention the issues of historic allegations and why I believe they are so critically important an issue to address. When you are a member of the armed services, you know that despite the many unknowns, there will be some givens. And the most important given is that however difficult things become, one of your buddies will have your 6 o'clock. Whether as a serviceman you are in a tight spot in a ditch in Northern Ireland, the Falklands, Africa, Srebrenica, Afghanistan, or Iraq, or many of the other conflicts our services take part in, somebody would always be by your side, and you would be by theirs. No one was left behind. No one was hung out to dry. That is what veterans rightly expect when they have done their duty and they return to civilian life. Someone should always have their 6 o'clock, and that is the country, the very country that put them in harm's way during their service. But recently we've seen the rise of ambulance-chasing lawyers who've done little more than hound soldiers who have only been doing what is asked for them. Now, in some cases, those lawyers have no experience of the pressures of armed conflict, and the biggest quandary they've had to face is the decision of whether to have a latte or a flat white. If we want our armed service to transition fully to civilian life, then we need to know that we have their 6 o'clock. They should know that when it comes to the law, providing they have followed it, we will never hang them out to dry. And we also need to know that those like John Downey, who is strongly believed to have blown up my friends and colleagues and their horses in London, will face the full face of the law. Now, Presiding Officer, I would briefly like to mention the issue of housing, which I think is so important. And it's been mentioned today about the fact that soldiers, when they leave, are given a short period to leave their house. But the reason why that is done is to ensure that the council finds suitable housing for them and that quarters are kept vacant for families that come in. Let me tell you, having been a married soldier, there is nothing worse than if your wife cannot accompany you to where you are serving. Now, Presiding Officer, by 2028, it is expected that almost half of all veterans living in Scotland will be of working age. There will be more veterans of working age who have families and built up skills and are looking for a way to re-enter civilian life. Therefore, I believe it is absolutely crucial that this Scottish Government, in partnership with the UK and Welsh Government, sets the right conditions for a seamless transition. They need to know that we will always have the soldiers' backs and servicemen's backs, because we need to recognise they have been prepared to give their all for us, and therefore we should do the same for them. Former armed service personnel have so much to offer society when they leave the services, and it's up to us in this Parliament and across the United Kingdom to make sure that we release their full potential. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I now call on Graham Day to close the Government. Minister, please, till 5 o'clock.
Presiding Officer, I want to thank members for their contributions, and I'm going to try and respond as best I can to as many of those in the time that I have available. Before I do that, though, I want to update Parliament on the strategy for our veterans and the work that the Scottish Government has been undertaking since the strategy was launched in November 2018. The strategy set out to build on the work by organisations across the public, private and charitable sectors to support and empower veterans by setting clear goals for the next 10 years and beyond about how we should support our current veterans and the veterans of the future. The aim was to ensure that every veteran would feel even more valued, supported and empowered, and I'm clear that this should extend to their families also. The Chamber may well recall that the governments of the United Kingdom joined forces to create and launch the strategy, demonstrating our shared commitment to supporting the veterans community and ensuring that the support that they receive is fit for the present and for the years to come. Following the launch, each government conducted its own consultation on the strategy and undertook to share the feedback to ensure that wherever they were located in the UK, the views of veterans, their families and those who support them were heard. Presiding Officer, I was intending to use the opportunity today to launch the Scottish Government's response to the Veterans Strategy and to highlight some of the actions that we will be taking forward. However, one of the recurring messages that have come out of our consultation on the strategy has been stakeholders' praise of the Government's working together to jointly own the strategy, putting veterans before politics, as some described it. Therefore, given the forthcoming general election and the restrictions that this has created, and following a request from the UK Government, I've taken the decision to delay publishing our response until early in the new year in an attempt to align the timing of our response with other governments across the UK. I hope Parliament will recognise that doing so is a genuine attempt to seek to maintain the collaborative approach which has gone down so well with the sector. That said, one area that I want to focus on that loomed large during the consultation, which has been raised directly with me on many occasions, and we've heard today referenced, is around the transition process, where service leavers are prepared for life back in the civilian world. It's also, as we have heard, been the subject of a commentary by the present Veterans Commissioner, Charlie Walsh, published just last week. There are criticisms that, given its fundamental importance to a successful transition, the process does not begin early enough, is too narrowly focused on employment outcomes and needs more content about other aspects, including education options and life skills, such as managing money and securing suitable housing, as a number of members have referenced. Clearly, action to improve the transition process lies primarily with the MOD and the UK Government, and I expect that their response to the strategy will include steps to address this. But again, in keeping with the joint government collaboration on the strategy, I've spoken to Johnny Mercer, the MOD's Minister for Defence, People and Veterans, and offered him every support from the Scottish Government in preparing service leavers for their lives after the military. Presiding Officer, our consultation on the strategy for veterans has provided an ideal opportunity to review our support for the community, and I look forward to publishing in detail our response to the strategy early in the new year and not later than the end of January. Now to address some of the points raised by members. I would commend Alec Rowley for reminding us of the sacrifice that families have made and continue to make, having lost loved ones in service of their country, and it's particularly that legacy is felt at this time of year. He made a couple of other points, one on homelessness. Now, the long-term trend on veterans' homelessness is encouraging. Nevertheless, the spike more recently is a concern, and that's one of the reasons why in 2020 we'll be developing a specific pathway to try and prevent homelessness amongst the veterans community, and I think that's quite an important piece of work. He referenced the Mental Health Action Plan and tackling geographical challenges for veterans. I think I noted earlier that the new veterans, the care network, that's one of the tasks that they will be undertaking, so we are very much alive to those points. Maurice Corrie asked about underpinning funding for smaller charities. The vehicle, the principal vehicle, of course, for this is the Veterans Fund, and we are exploring, as a government, in partnership with some of our organisations in Scotland, how we might grow that to meet that demand, because it is a very significant demand, as we all know. Maurice Corrie also called for maximising the skills potential of departing service leavers, and again, that's a priority for this government. I think one way of doing that is to actively encourage those who proactively recruit from the services to become vocal advocates for this approach, to help challenge that ill-informed view that veterans have somehow been diminished by their service, when for the vast majority, as Mark Griffin and Gordon MacDonald noted, the reverse is true. Maurice Corrie also asked about Unforgotten Forces. Now, we all know Unforgotten Forces are carrying out fantastic work in supporting our older veterans. It's a good model, there's no doubt about that. I met recently with members of the consortium to be updated on how the work's progressing and their plans for the future. They are in the midst of ongoing efforts to secure sustainable funding beyond 2020, when the UK Government LIBOR funding ceases. I've written to the UK Government on their behalf, asking what plans the Westminster has to support this work. After all, it set up the consortium, it provided the prime funding. The principal responsibility for supporting this work lies at Westminster. However, our dialogue with the consortium will continue because, as I said, I value it. Mike Rumbles raised a very important point regarding the social isolation of veterans when they're hospitalised. Between 2017 and 2019, the Defence Medical Welfare Service provided just such a service within hospitals, thanks to funding from the Unforgotten Forces Consortium. That veteran-to-veteran support has continued in 2 health board areas, notably NHS Fife and NHS Ayrshire and Arran, since then, because of funding directly from those boards. Additionally, Legion Scotland's befriending service will accept referrals by hospitals. Now, there's a GDPR issue here that has to be overcome, and so far as not only would any hospitalised veterans have to be prepared to declare themselves as having served, they also have to indicate a desire for such a visit. But none of this is insurmountable, and I'm happy to ask health colleagues to investigate how such a service might be delivered on a wider basis. But I would also say that the Scottish Government is in the midst of exploring how it can support veterans' organisations to enhance their befriending offerings in a wider sense. Gordon MacDonald highlighted the fees charged to armed forces families, and to be clear, the Scottish Government views those as excessive. George Adam talked about deficits in the financial skills of some leaving the services, and he's right to highlight this, but I would point out to him there's a growing willingness, a growing recognition, particularly in the Army in Scotland, where they better recognise the need to better equip their personnel in this sort of regard. I was also draw his attention to a financial education programme being delivered to serving personnel by Barclays Bank. It's a first-class service. Jackie Bailey, alongside the usual elements to her contribution, noted the role of spouses in supporting the submarine service. I agree, it's significant. I've met with this cohort twice in recent weeks. particularly around the issue of employability. It's hugely challenging for Navy wives to be able to secure sustained employment. And that's one of the reasons why we are helping to develop a can-do entrepreneurship hub at Faz Lane. Annabel Ewing noted the excellent work of... No, I'm genuinely running out of time, as you'll note from the clock. Annabel Ewing noted the excellent work of Councillor Rod Kavanagh as the Armed Forces champion in Fife, and she was right to do so. What we need to do is to ensure that level of excellence is the norm across Scotland. And I would acknowledge we have local authority champions from all political persuasions doing a first-class job. Presiding Officer, as ever, this has been a constructive part of the parliamentary programme, demonstrating the support for our veterans that exists across the political spectrum. I look forward to returning to the Chamber early in the new year to update Parliament on the Government's response to the strategy consultation findings. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, and that concludes this afternoon's debate. We're going to move straight to decision time, and there's just one question this evening. The question is that motion 20103 in the name of Graham Day on Scottish Government support for veterans and the Armed Forces community in Scotland be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed, and that concludes decision time. Oh, point of order, Edward Mountain.
At questions earlier this afternoon, I questioned the Cabinet Secretary, Michael Matheson, about uncompleted works on the Queensferry crossing. The Cabinet Secretary suggested that I should read the papers that have been sent to the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee. Indeed, I have, Cabinet Secretary, and the letter that you referred to, no doubt, is the one of the 14th of October 2019. I specifically asked about one question, which was the completion of the lifts in the pillars. And you said that I hadn't confirmed the details of the letter. They're not mentioned in the letter. Presiding Officer, I wonder if there's a way that the Cabinet Secretary can correct the record, because he has obviously misconstrued what he wrote in his letter.
Thank Mr Mountain for the point of order. It's clearly a matter of dispute over either the information given or the question asked. I would encourage the member to ask another question, or perhaps to pursue it in committee, or to put a letter to the Minister, or pursue one of the many other ways of addressing this issue. And on that note, we conclude decision time. We'll move on now to members' business, which is in the name of Jeremy Balfour on hashtag Purple Light Up, a global movement for change. But we'll just take a few moments pause while the Minister and members change seats.